I'm going to read a little bit about your book
Cool.
here that I was sent over from Daniel. So it's going to give me a second to read. And let me just go ahead and introduce you and your book. Amidst some of America's darkest hours in Afghanistan, life and death at Abbey Gate displays humanity at its finest, quoted Major Tom Schumann, United States Marine Corps, who's also author of best-selling book, Always Faithful, right? So I'm going to read what this says here is, as the American government began the disastrous mass evacuations of its Afghan allies, a group of American veterans saw the writing on the wall. The people who had supported them on the ground over the past 2 decades were going to be left behind. Instead of watching on the sideline, they sprang into action. The effort became known nationally as #Digital Dunkirk in reference to the civilian aspect of the evacuation of soldiers from the beaches of Dunkirk in 1940. As America's last days in Afghanistan came to a chaotic end and an ad hoc group of veterans, intelligence assets, and legislative orders undertook an extraordinary mission to honor the U.S. battlefield creed to leave no comrade behind. Relying on cell phones and satellites as their weapons, they worked feverishly around the clock to help evacuate as many Afghans who had supported U.S. troops over the past 20 years as possible. As the desperate mass of Afghans tried to flee brutal Taliban rule, Marines of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, worked at Hamid Karzai International Airport's Abbey Gate in conditions that brought combat-hardened veterans to tears. After an ISIS suicide bomber detonated his S-vest, killing 13 U.S. service members, operations came to a halt. This is told through the eyes of Mikael, his Afghan friend Abdul, and the 2-1 Marines on the ground, including a Marine squad leader who personally led the Afghans through the airport. Life and Death at Abbey Gate tells the story behind the story of the mass evacuation of over 124,000 Americans and Afghan allies during a 2-week period in the summer of 2021. I get kind of choked up on it, Mikael, and it's because I've lived through it and watched all of that, happen, and the collapse of the Afghan what we were hoping would happen, where the Afghan army would rise up and help defend itself and take on the task of doing that, just fall within itself. There was really no end game to the getting out. It was kind of left in shambles for the presidency that was coming in to take power, signed by former Trump, the President Trump, in December 22nd, prior to Trump, Biden becoming president. So here we are, left with this quagmire of pulling out, Taliban being invited to Camp David White House through Trump. All of this stuff's happening. And then all of a sudden Biden's coming in and everyone's got this Rubik's Cube of disastrous shit happening. And here you are, Mikael, trying just to get in and get people who need to get out because of the Taliban rule, right? They beat feet, they torture, they don't want women to have any rights. They don't want them to show their hair. They don't want them to have jobs, be educated or smarter than they are because they are. It's really just a really weird quagmire, bro. And you're involved, and your book dives into that, yes. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, it was, so fast forward a little bit, I guess, but Abdul and Mohammed are the 2 main characters in my book. They were contractors that we worked with up in Mazar Sharif in northern Afghanistan. But, more than being coworkers, we were friends, right? So when Afghanistan started to fall, the focus from me and people that served with Abdul Muhammad was just straight, we need to figure out how to get these guys out. And that's really what the majority of the book is about. And, obviously anybody watching the Afghanistan withdrawal just knows what an absolute nightmare and shit show it was. I mean, you mentioned the ANA, the Afghan National Army, fell very quickly, right?
Immediately, yes.
There's all sorts of assessments from our intelligence agencies on how long the ANA was going to be able to hold out. Some said 6 months, 12 months. Some said that they were going to be able to hold Kabul forever and the Taliban would never take it over. Obviously, they took it over in just a matter of days. So it was just a huge intelligence failure, obviously, on our part. And I know a lot of people blame the ANA for not really standing up and fighting. But at the same time, you have to put yourself in their shoes and think about, what are they fighting for at that point? We have abandoned them. Their own president has abandoned them. They have no leadership. A lot of them probably haven't been paid in months. And the Taliban's at their front door, ready to slaughter their wives and children. It's like, what would you do in that situation? So, to me, I really don't blame the ANA at all. They're just trying to survive and provide for their family, just like any American family would.
They kind of just had to dissolve and blend back into society and be like, that's
exactly,
not me.
Yep.
That wasn't me, because these guys are coming down with this hard rule of AK-47 law.
Right, exactly.
It's just like, oh, right there at your doorstep. They'll just shoot you. They don't care. There's just
and it's
it's
still continuing to this day, which is, what I'm most frustrated about is just how we're over 2 years removed from that situation and we're still not doing shit, right? I mean, we're still slowly evacuating people out of there, our SIV applicants, but it's just an absolute disaster. So, I get reports every single day of our Afghan allies still getting slaughtered today.
Right. And, I didn't realize that one of the air bases was Russian that we had occupied, which is now being taken back by the Taliban.
Bagram.
It's like this whole, yeah, exactly. I didn't know that was I thought, oh, hey, it was like an Afghan base, but it was really a Russian base that we went in and took over.
It was, yep. Bagram Airfield. And, we could go on forever about the failures of this, but while we're talking about Bagram, I'll say this, Bagram was a very secure base, right? That was the center of U.S. Movement in Afghanistan. And when I was there in 2019 and 2020, actually on my way out, we were some of the last troops in Afghanistan, and the place was a ghost town. I mean, there was probably a few thousand troops in Bagram, and it was still extremely secure, right? And I mean, like, some of the guys that I deployed with that had deployed previously in previous years, they had been there when Bagram had 100,000 people. So for it to still be such a secure base with a few thousand troops, and then for us to run the evacuation out of HKIA, which is a civilian airport that didn't have any security and only one working runway where Bagram had multiple, was just again, a disaster. We should have held on to Bagram. Instead, we handed it over to the ANA in a botched handoff. We didn't even really tell them we were leaving. We shut off the lights and took off one night. And ultimately, that led to the Taliban taking over Bagram. But that's where the evacuation should have taken place, because we could have easily defended it for as long as we wanted to, and we could have got all our allies out. But instead, we ran it out of HKIA, and obviously 13 of our troops got killed and hundreds of Afghans got killed because of that decision, possibly. So just failure all around.
Well, we watched the aircraft as the C-17 Globemaster took off and closed up its wheels, and the C-5s and whatever taken off with all of the who was inside. Just they couldn't take who was on the outside.
Yeah.
And they didn't know that was going to close up and seal. They thought they'd probably go up in the landing gear or whatever. Still would have been a bad situation. Yeah. And, that was a disastrous media moment for the world to see that. And
I think that just shows the desperation of those people. Imagine being so desperate that you're willing to hold on to the wheel well of an airplane taking off. And they're not dumb. Like you said, maybe they didn't realize the wheel was going to collapse on itself, but they knew that there was a 99% chance of death holding onto the wheel well of that plane. Yeah. And they still chose,
like, I'm just going to hold on.
Yep. They still thought that was a better choice than staying and living in a country under Taliban rule.
God, maybe they thought that the plane just wouldn't take off, like, oh, we'll just hold on. They won't roll with us. Those pilots are like,
yeah,
they're like, we have a mission.
Right.
Bro.
That's so crazy.
And that's got to be heavy on their hearts. You know what I'm saying? Those pilots and the crew of that aircraft. Let's not, war.
For sure. Absolutely. There was,
holy cow.
Moral injury is a term that's going around a lot right now from the Afghanistan withdrawal. And, for my book, I interviewed a ton of Marines that were at Abbey Gate from 2-1 and 1-8. And man, these guys carry around a heavy burden. And just the things they saw were things that no human should ever have to see, of just how disastrous it was, the conditions at Abbey Gate. Death everywhere. Mothers.
The baby being handed to the Marine that we saw, that 3-week-old child, the mom was just like, or whoever was throwing the baby up to the Marine. He's like, ah.
Not only that, there was mothers that were literally throwing their babies over the 12-foot T-walls, just hoping that there was Americans on the other side. And unfortunately, there was Constantine wire on top of these T-walls, and some of the babies were getting stuck in the Constantine wire and just bleeding out there before anybody could get to them. It was as crazy as you could possibly imagine. There was, children getting crushed to death at Abbey Gate in the shit-filled canal, and the Marines were doing everything they could to get to them. But there was just, if you've seen pictures, you just know how many people were there. It's just a mass of humanity, and these Marines just couldn't get there to save these kids. So there was a ton of stories like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have a friend who was over there, and he got out 400 people. He's SAS, former SAS. They captured him. They didn't know he was SAS when they captured him. They just thought, he's like, I have permits and I have all the things you guys require of me to do the things and move through your country, et cetera, et cetera. And so they still just captured him and just beat his feet for weeks. Jeez. And then they finally let him go. Now he tells his story, and it's just like, how he got 400 people out. And I mean, it's a vibe here in Utah. So I own a simple, fun airsoft war game environment where we go and I sell the equipment and the gear that is like plate carriers, etc. And here I have some dude coming in with a beard like yours saying, "Hey, Rad." I'm like, "What's up?" He's like, "I just need 6 of those plate carriers, please." I was like, "What team of airsoft are you on?"
Yeah.
Right? It's a whole different airsoft team. And he's like, "Yeah, and this guy was going to Ukraine to go there." Yeah. Then the Afghan thing was happening, and that was all intertwining with it. And they were picking up the gear for that as well. And so here I am just trying to outfit my sport of airsoft war games. But I got dudes coming in saying they need this pouch, all my M4 pouches, all these pouches, radio pouches, at a good price, by the way. I'm really a really good, fair priced warlord. Let me tell you right now. Okay. Come in and visit my shops. I'm not trying to plug it. I'm just saying the realization of someone like, they're going in outside of the regular, ways. They're just coming into different shops. I remember my dad being on a Green Beret team, and he went to Radio Shack to buy his radios back in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean,
just to have their own.
Yeah. We saw a bunch of guys going in, serving as civilians, Scott Mann, who wrote the book Pineapple Express. Awesome dude, saved a lot of lives. Guys like Tim Kennedy, Chad Robichaud, Nick Pomashano. They were called Save Our Allies. They flew in there as civilians, got a ton of people out. Nick Pomashano actually was the one that helped me get Abdul Muhammad manifested on a flight out. So just, phenomenal work from those guys, and just dropping everything to go over and spend their own money. One of the guys, sold his house or something, refinanced his house just so he could fund this project to get people out. So we saw, a lot of selfless acts of bravery, obviously, people putting their lives on the line to go over and do the right thing and try to help our allies out.
That's exactly what I saw coming through the shop doors. It's just like, all right, cool. Totally different ball game when it's not airsoft like that. There's a vibe about the spirit of that person. And I'm just like, okay, well, what can I help you with?
For sure.
I hope you call your hits.
Yeah.
Jeez, dude. Holy cow, man. That's some real deal over there. And, so I have a lot of guys that go and do the real deal, but then they play airsoft just to get it out of their system. And, maybe they're done with the real deal and they just want to kind of, I don't know, where do you get an opportunity to frag a grenade into a trench unless you're playing like paintball or war games, So it's like, if it's still itching, you can go look up your local airsoft community and probably just play. They'd love to have.
Yeah, I've never done that.
Whoever's out there.
Never done that, but it sounds like something I need to check out.
Some of my Marines, they take the M4 rifle and they see it and it looks and feels just like their real one, and they go to pull the charging handle out and it's still a toy. Yeah. They're like, wham! You're like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to really pull it all the way out, because they're mostly electric driven. So there's no cycling of that bolt, but for the aesthetics, holy cow. So, I mean, when you're going over in your book, you go over there, right? You go over to rescue.
No, so I spent the whole evacuation here in Michigan, actually. So that's really what the whole digital Dunkirk network was about, is, a bunch of veterans, most of which had probably served in Afghanistan or had some ties to Afghanistan, but some didn't at all and just wanted to do the right thing. We saw our government drop the ball. And we made promises to these partners. These Afghans fought with us, bled with us, served shoulder to shoulder with us for 20 years, and they were promised protection through the Special Immigrant Visa Program, commonly referred to as the SIV program. And our government just completely dropped the ball and was, the writing was on the wall. We could see that these people were going to get left behind. Back to the whole HKIA location. When I found out the evacuation was being run out of HKIA, I was doing the mental math of, how many runways do they have? Just one. How much time do we actually have? And how many SIV applicants are there? And the math just clearly wasn't adding up. Like, these people were not all going to get out. So that's when this network called Digital Dunkirk really formed up. And really wasn't an organized thing at the beginning. It was just a whole bunch of different chat rooms on Instagram, on Signal, on WhatsApp, of all these people coming together and essentially creating like a joint operations center online. So individually, like we had very little information, right? Like I came to this group with just 2 names, Abdul and Mohammed. But collectively, we realized we had a ton of information, like who was working what gates, who had phone numbers to, Marines standing at what gate, and what documentation the State Department was requiring at that moment. So together, we had just all the information you could possibly need. So this whole movement, that whoever came up with the name Digital Dunkirk is a genius because it fits perfectly. But this whole movement happened from our computers while we're sitting here at home. So a lot of people are working their day jobs here, and then at night, obviously, when it's daytime in Afghanistan, everyone's just hitting the phones and the computers, just trying to find ways to get their guys out. So
it's a lot more convenient today to just communicate. There's a lot more avenues, and you're not getting a newspaper article from a combat attack in Vietnam 2 weeks later.
Yep.